Hello, everybody. My name's Hilda Hayo, and I'm the CEO and Chief Admiral Nurse of Dementia UK. You're in the webinar, which is entitled New Insights on Working with Dementia. I've got some really great speakers today. So I've got Dr. Laura Lebec, I've got Dr. Rachel Allen, Dr. Kiera Kenny, and Dr. Connor MacDonald. This webinar will share emerging evidence from 3 research projects currently underway by the Working with Dementia Network Plus research team. I'm going to look at the presentations covering priorities for improving work experience, the economic impact of young onset dementia, and also how employment law is applied in practice. Any questions you might have, if you can place it in the chat, that would be really great. And they will be picked up with Catherine Keeley. And at 1:15, we will look at all of the questions and then we will direct them to the relevant speaker. So firstly, I'm going to hand over to Laura.
Thank you so much, Hilda, for the very kind introduction, and thank you to the Young Dementia Network for inviting us to present today. So I'm Laura Lebec. I'm the Network Plus Manager at the University of the West of Scotland, and that's where I oversee the Working with Dementia Network Plus. So what's our network about? Well, we know that people who are living with dementia, along with their family carers, can face significant inequalities that affect their ability to participate in the workforce. And the aim of our network is to bring together a wide range of perspectives. So that includes people who have lived experience of dementia, carers, health and social care professionals, researchers, policymakers, and employers. And together we want to explore innovative ways to create meaningful and lasting change to improve employment opportunities and experiences for those who are affected by dementia. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our 3 researchers who have been leading work over the last year on the first phase of our research network. Dr. Rachel Allen will be presenting findings from her focus group work. Dr. Kiera Kenny will be presenting insights from her rapid evidence review, and Dr. Connor MacDonald will be discussing his research on employment tribunal judgments. So I think we've got a really great session ahead, and I'm going to hand over now to Rachel.
Thanks very much, Laura. It's really lovely to be here. Good afternoon to everybody. Hopefully my slides are going to be appearing on the screen momentarily. And can everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful, thank you. So yeah, my name is Rachel Allen, and I was the research fellow on the nominal group technique, or NGT study, that contributed to setting priorities for the Working with Dementia Plus network. I'm grateful to Claire, one of the panelists at our recent Working with Dementia conference, for recording her contribution to this presentation. And I'll start now by sharing a video of Claire explaining why dementia and employment is important to her. Claire, thank you very much for speaking with me this afternoon. And I think I'd just like to start by asking you why dementia and employment is important to you.
So dementia and employment is a hugely important topic to me. I became responsible for caring for my dad, Michael. When I was in my 20s, I was working full time. I was a mum of 2, and I suddenly had this responsibility to take care of my dad as well. And so I'm very open with sharing my experience of how it felt to become a carer whilst I was working, and the experience that I had around trying to balance that responsibility of caring and working at the same time, and just some of the challenges that I experienced.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of those challenges?
Yeah, so I mean, at first, as most people, you know, the responsibility doesn't feel that much, so you tend to think you can manage it all. But as my dad's dementia became more apparent and his needs increased, I I became aware of just really struggling to hold everything together. For a while, I didn't tell my employer about my caring responsibilities, but then, as is often the case, hit a bit of a crisis point, and I had to spend more time with my dad. His needs were becoming increasingly greater, and so I was struggling to maintain that balance of working and being there for my dad. He was having more appointments. He was needing me to be around more. And at that point, I had to tell my employer that I was providing care. And I did have to take a little bit of emergency carers leave, which they were absolutely fine about, and they supported me with. But it was more the ongoing. So things like needing to be around to put my dad to bed at night, needing to be there for regular appointments. I was having to decline meetings. I just didn't have as much presence at work, and that became a challenge. It tended to create a sense of I couldn't do enough. I began to feel really guilty about not being able to be present all the time at work, and I felt that I was starting to be sidelined from opportunities as well. There was an assumption that because I was a carer, I didn't want to progress in my career.
As Claire said about her employer making assumptions, we didn't want to make assumptions as a network. We wanted to ensure that our priorities reflected what those affected by dementia at work felt was important. So we held 7 focus groups with people living with dementia and personal carers, and groups also included stakeholders, employers, policymakers, and other researchers. These focus groups used this technique called nominal group technique, which meant that everyone in the group contributed ideas and was able to vote for what they felt was the most important. The question that we asked each group was, how can we improve the work-related experiences of people living with dementia and family carers? Participants for each group were given this question in advance so that they could consider ideas to bring with them as we started each group. So each group began with the sharing of the ideas that everyone had thought of. Then we had a discussion together as a group, and then finally a voting process where each participant voted for what they thought was the top idea, second top idea, third, and so on. So from each group, we had a list of specific ideas, and we also recorded the group discussion so that we could analyse that as well. So today I'm going to focus on the top 2 ideas from our groups for those with a dementia diagnosis and our groups for personal carers. Each group agreed on the wording and phrasing of their ideas, and you can read the full list from all groups in the project summary, which is available on our website. For the first group, for those with a dementia diagnosis, the top ideas were that the focus must be on the person's ability and well-being rather than disability, as with other long-term conditions, and government guidance and policy for employers. And for our second group, the top idea was provide workplace adjustments, accommodation, and must include collaboration and flexibility, and also individualised support for all different employment contexts. For our groups with experience of caring for somebody with a dementia diagnosis, our first group's top priority was early and accurate diagnosis with support to enable timely diagnosis, gateway access to benefits and support for carers and people with dementia, and also education and training about dementia in the workplace to improve attitudes, behaviours, responses to early symptoms and address stigma. And in our second group, for those with caring experience, the top idea was flexible working arrangements for carer and person with dementia, followed by mandatory and regular awareness, education and training. We analysed all the ideas that each group voted for and included the hours of group discussions in this analysis as well. And this contributed to our 3 priorities for the network. And these are work and wellbeing, inclusive workplaces, and economic costs and benefits. This focus group research was important as we have evidence of what we need to focus on and where gaps in support and understanding can be addressed through further research. When Claire and I had our discussion, I asked her about the network priorities and she had some great reflections, which unfortunately we don't have time for in full, but here are some of the thoughts that she had.
The assumption was that once something was put into place in terms of an adjustment for me, that was enough. And actually what I needed was regular conversations and regular check-ins to say, actually, what's changing? What do you need now? And I think the assumption was that an adjustment had been made and that was fine. That was it. Nothing else needed to be done. So I think, regular check-ins on my well-being would have been really helpful. Regular check-ins on what my caring responsibilities would have been really helpful to just maintain a level of appropriate support during the different stages of my care journey. I think the economic side of it's really interesting because I was at the point of resigning. Ironically, my dad passed away just before I handed my resignation letter in, so I didn't resign, but I'm aware of a huge number of people, certainly within organisations that I've worked with, that have lost, particularly women, at the peak of their career because they simply can't juggle the responsibilities of being sandwiched between childcare, looking after elderly parents or relatives, and the pressure of trying to maintain a career as well. There's a need for employers, for line managers to be educated and have better support around how to handle those conversations. I think in my experience, it was often born out of fear of saying the wrong thing. People I worked with, and particular a couple of line managers that spring to mind, were uncomfortable because they didn't want to say the wrong thing or inadvertently offer something that the organisation couldn't fulfil. So I think having some clear structure from HR around practices for carers, having some clear policy and legislation is really important.
Thanks again to Claire there for her reflections and for speaking with me. And we'd love to hear from you at the webinar today, if you can relate to these priorities, if you have similar or perhaps different views and experiences to Claire. As a network, we recently promoted some funding for further research into these important areas, and we are currently reviewing the expressions of interest for that funding. We're excited that we can now look forward to supporting work that directly addresses the issues the focus groups discussed. So thank you for listening today. Our website has resources you may find useful, and you can also subscribe to our monthly digest to be kept up to date with our various projects. And I'm going to end by playing a short clip from Rainer. This was filmed at our conference, and you can watch it in full on our YouTube channel, and then I'll return briefly to this site in case you want any of the details from it.
Work is so central to our sense of who we are for most of our lives. And that transition is way too sharp if you're told, if your employment ends with a diagnosis. And there's so much that could be done before you have to leave work, before it becomes appropriate.
Thank you to Rainer there for permission to share that, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rachel. We're now going to move across to Kiera.
Hi everyone, I'm just sharing my screen. Thank you. So I'm here today to talk about the individual and societal economic consequences of young onset dementia. And I think it follows on quite appropriately from Rachel's presentation as well. So my role on the network is to work on a series of rapid reviews. So I'm just going to start by giving a brief definition of what a rapid review is. So it's a type of research synthesis that summarises existing evidence in a shorter time frame than a traditional systematic review, which can often take some time. So it uses streamlined methods such as searching fewer databases, limiting the date range, and things like having one reviewer screen the studies with some checks. And ultimately, the purpose is to produce timely evidence for decision makers while still following transparent and systematic principles. So moving on to the introduction, we know that young onset dementia refers to any dementia where symptom onset occurs before the age of 65. And in the UK, it affects around 70,000 people. Given the age of diagnosis, it can affect the life course of individuals at a peak time of socio-economic and professional productivity. And employment is often one of the first areas of life that is affected by young onset dementia, with significant financial consequences for both individuals and their families. And whilst a person diagnosed may continue to work, leaving paid employment early is common, and this could be voluntary or involuntary. And generally, the rationale for this review was that most research focuses on economic impacts of late onset dementia, so particularly costs associated with health and social care. And there does seem to be a gap in the literature with regards to young onset dementia and economics. So next slide, please. I can't see that the slides changed. Can everyone else see that the slides changed?
Yes, I can see that.
There we go. Mm-hmm.
I think it's just very slow.
Okay. So when cognitive declines early during working life, it can affect so many areas. So things like, of course, health and well-being, people's jobs and their career, their finances, and of course, housing and bills, and also dependence as well. So if we move on to the aims of the research, the aim of the research was to examine the data from current research on the economic consequences of young onset dementia on individuals, households, and the wider economy. And I wanted to focus on two research questions. So what are the economic and financial consequences of young onset dementia for individuals and their households? And also the wider societal and public sector economic consequences associated with young onset dementia. So moving on to the methods, the inclusion criteria was solely focused on young onset dementia. There must be an economic consequence related to this. And we focused on research published from 2016 to currently. 3 databases were searched, so Medline, EconLit, and Scopus. And to analyse the data, we used a parallel synthesis convergent design, where quantitative and qualitative data was both included and analysed at that stage, and then talked about in the discussion. And I think really importantly, so I consulted with the network stakeholder and lived experience group on the research topics. And I was very grateful that a person with lived experience of young onset dementia contributed to this review particularly. So in total, there were just over 1,500 articles retrieved, and just 13 were included in the analysis after all of the screening process. So the majority of these were quantitative data papers, so that was 6 of them. And I think there are about 5 qualitative and I think about 2 mixed methods. And then I wanted to look at the level of the economic consequences within these articles. So the majority focused on individual and household level. There was less attention paid to the sort of broader societal level, and no papers focused solely on the individual level of economic consequences, which I think reflects the interconnected nature of young onset dementia and how it affects families as well. So although there were only 13 articles included, there was a lot of rich data within each and every one of these articles. So the analysis is still a work in progress. So I thought the best approach today would just be to highlight some of the key data that was extracted and then share with you some of the preliminary themes that have been found across the data. So in an employee cohort, you can see that the job loss rate was nearly double for people diagnosed with early onset dementia, which is how this article referred to it. And the job loss rate for family members of the person living with early onset dementia was slightly higher than those who did not have a relative living with early onset dementia. And the total annual cost of young onset dementia in England was estimated to be about 1.2 billion. And one study found that the top 3 cost contributors associated with young onset dementia was productivity loss, informal care, and also home care. And around 25% of family carers in one study reported that finances was an unmet need. And it was really interesting because with this study, they said that finances were not a current concern, but they were concerned about future later finances and the implications of that. And I think a really important aspect to highlight is accessing welfare support to mitigate some of the financial strain was described as a complex process. So in the UK, there are a number of assessments that people may need to go through to access financial support. So things like personal independence payments, needs assessments, carers assessments. But unfortunately, service users describe these as complex, and I think that's a real barrier, and we need to ensure that people can access financial support and welfare when they need it. So looking at some of the preliminary findings and themes, so I think the first major theme that appeared was employment disruption and income loss. And then following on from this, there was the household role reconfiguration and economic adaptation. So people coming to terms with their sort of new situation, how they're going to manage that going forward. And then a separate theme was the financial strain and cost burden associated with young onset dementia, whether people need to stop driving and things like that can have a real impact on families. And then its own separate theme was about the long-term financial insecurity that people felt as a result of the diagnosis. And then also there are increased service use and associated costs with young onset dementia. And again, something really important that we found was issues with the welfare system and structural barriers to access and financial support for people. So to conclude, we know that there are profound economic consequences associated with young onset dementia at the individual and household level. And although the data shows that there is an increased need for service usage, associated costs and welfare, there is a lot less known about the broader public economic consequences. We know that early diagnosis and robust social support systems are vital to mitigate the financial challenges experienced. And ultimately, we need employment, economic and social supports at the moment to make these issues better for people who've been diagnosed and for their family as well. So I think that brings me to the end, and just to echo what Rachel said, please do follow our work if you're interested in this, and do reach out to us. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So 2 very interesting pieces of research. And now we're going to move on to Connor, who's going to be talking about employment law and how it's applied.
So, hi everyone, my name is Dr Kiera MacDonald, and I'm working on the study looking at dementia and employment tribunals. And I'm doing this alongside Dr Lindsay Bengston at Northumberland University. So what's our study about? The general aim of our study is to analyse employment tribunal judgments relating to dementia from across the UK, Canada and Australia, and understand how legislation is applied in workplace contexts. And we hope that our research will provide learning outcomes for employers and claimants in this area, and could also offer recommendations for legal reform. So we're doing this by looking at employment tribunal judgments which are freely available online. And by analysing the judgments, we hope we'll understand the current practice and how legislation is applied, the volume and characteristics of workplace claims, the demographics of claimants and respondents, the outcomes, trends over time, and how effectively the legal system supports employees in practice. So what are we looking at? So during the search, the tribunal judgments are sorted into 3 categories. The first category includes those directly involving dementia in the workplace. The second category involves an indirect link to dementia, such as family carers who are working whilst their loved one's going through a diagnosis. And the third category are judgments which mention dementia in passing or aren't relevant to the search whatsoever. So for the judgments directly relating to dementia, we're looking at the following characteristics. So they're the year of judgment, the judgment type, the occupation, gender, and age of the claimants, and the outcome. And these characteristics are identified in a discussion alongside the lived experience panel of the network. So what have we found so far? So databases from the UK, Canada, and Australia were searched using the following search terms. So we used dementia, or Alzheimer's, or mild cognitive impairment. And we used both dementia and MCI to try and widen the search term, just to try and get maybe instances where it was the very start of the dementia journey rather than needing a formal diagnosis. And for today, I'm going to focus on the UK part of the search. So the UK search returned 5,713 judgments, and we looked at 1,500. So these were analysed and have shown that 22 judgments directly related to people working with a dementia diagnosis. Now, within those 22, 4 related to respondents living with dementia, and the 18 included claimants with a diagnosis of dementia or MCI, and that's what we focused on for our study. And our analysis also showed that there was 56 cases indirectly related to dementia, and this included 32 involving carers of people living with a dementia diagnosis. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just looking at the characteristics of judgments that directly related to claimants with a dementia or MCI diagnosis. So out of the 18 cases that we looked at, 3 were completely successful outright, 7 partly succeeded. This is where claimants were successful in at least one of their claims. 5 were completely dismissed. 1 was struck out for being out of time. 1 was partially struck out, so that's where one of their claims was dismissed, but the rest proceeded to further hearing, and 1 case proceeded to further judgment. And out of the 18 judgments, 10 claimants represented themselves, and out of this number, 6 partly succeeded, 2 were dismissed, and 1 was struck out. 1 claimant was represented by a family member, in this case his daughter, and 7 were represented by legal counsel. I also want to look at the gender split of the claimants that we looked at. So out of the 17 claimants, we had 11 that were female and 6 that were male, and this roughly aligns with the gender split in dementia figures, as dementia is more common among women than men, and approximately 65% of people with dementia are women. And the difference between men and women is even more pronounced in Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common type of dementia, where women were twice as more likely to develop Alzheimer's than men. And I also want to look at the diagnosis type from our claimants. So 2 claimants had perceived dementia. So these were claimants that didn't have a formal diagnosis and didn't display symptoms, but their case centred on stigmatised language or stigma related to dementia, as their employers believed that they had a diagnosis. And 1 claimant, they used both terms MCI and early onset dementia, so that's why I tried to capture that separately. And 1 claimant was waiting for a diagnosis at the time of the tribunal. 11 claimants had a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, and 3 had a formal diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's. So what are the UK judgments showing us? So far, the judgments in the UK have shown that very few cases have been brought by people working with a dementia diagnosis. Discrimination is the primary claim type, brought in 14 out of the 18 cases, and the success rate for judgments relating to people working with a dementia diagnosis is 55%, and this number is quite striking, as a recent study looking at age discrimination in UK workplaces highlighted a 5% success rate. And a 2019 study showed that in England and Wales, less than a fifth of disability discrimination cases reached a preliminary hearing, and at the final stage or at the full hearing, a claimant was almost 3 times more likely to fail than to succeed. The reasons for these outcomes included restrictive judicial decisions, complex legal tests, the inequality between claimants and employers, and the stigma attached to claimants with mental impairments. And these factors contributed to the barriers to justice for disabled claimants, making it challenging for them to enforce their legal rights. And the success rate from the UK part of our research does indicate that the current legislation is capable of positive outcomes for people living with dementia. And our study also showed us that over half the cases that we looked at centred on MCI rather than confirmed or suspected dementia. And this could indicate that cases have been brought during the earlier stages of the condition rather than after a formal diagnosis has been given out. And the qualitative analysis has shown that employer passivity in responding to affected employees. So this could be seen in a few different ways. The first way was an employer not asking for clarification. Now, this could be seen in the case of Mr. D. Watts versus Long Eaton Plant. So in this case, the claimant was diagnosed with early onset dementia and then subsequently Alzheimer's, and he phoned his employer about his diagnosis. However, the respondent claimed that during the call, the claimant verbally resigned from his position. After this phone call in August, the next communication was a letter received by the claimant on the 31st of October, informing him that his employment had ended with effect from the 30th of September. And the tribunal held that the employer should have, at the very minimum, written to the claimant asking for clarification regarding his intentions, and should have actually gone beyond this and explored the possibility of an alternative role within the company. By not taking this step, the tribunal ruled that the employer was in breach of their duty to make reasonable adjustments, and this amounted to disability discrimination. And this case illustrates the detrimental impact of employer inaction, as employers' failure to seek clarification or to explore alternative roles reinforce the assumption that continued employment following a dementia diagnosis isn't possible. Employer inaction can also result in avoidable delays and the failure to implement agreed reasonable adjustments. This could be seen in the case of Mr. McGuinness versus Merseycare NHS Trust. So in this case, Access to Work recommended reasonable adjustments in January 2020. The requisition for the equipment and training wasn't approved until April 2020, and by January 2021, the agreed adjustments still hadn't been fully implemented. And in fact, the claimant had to follow this up himself due to the inaction from his managers and his employers. Our analysis has also shown that there's legal vulnerability that's faced by unrepresented claimants. So surprisingly, most cases that we looked at were claimants who represented themselves. This is a significant observation, as bringing a case involves navigating an adversarial, memory-dependent and document-heavy tribunal process. And this highlighted a procedural vulnerability created by cognitive impairment. This could be seen in the case of Mr. Knight versus Catalyst Housing. So in this case, the claimant sent the initial claim form twice to the trade union rather than to the tribunal himself, and this resulted in his claim being brought out of time, and it was struck out due to this, as the tribunal couldn't consider it. The study also showed challenges for unrepresented claimants in framing and maximising their claims. This could be seen in the case of Mr. J. Warrilow versus Open Work Limited. So in this case, a key event was a training event that the claimant was due to attend. So the claimant arrived 3 hours late for the training and then didn't attend the second day. Furthermore, whilst he was at the training, 3 female employees complained about his behaviour towards them. But it's important to note that part of the evidence put to the tribunal was a medical report which stated that the claimant's diagnosis was of behavioural subtype frontotemporal dementia accounts for his recent change in behaviour, and the exact quote was that this was likely to be a significant factor in his behaviour at work. However, because the case was brought as an unfair dismissal case and not disability discrimination, this aspect couldn't be considered. Our analysis also showed the prevalence of dementia-related stigma, and this is a common issue that was faced by several claimants. There were 3 separate ways that claimants experienced stigma in the workplace. The first was that employers viewed dementia symptoms as performance issues rather than wellbeing concerns. Secondly, some employers made repeated suggestions that employees living with dementia retire due to their diagnosis. And lastly, that claimants who didn't have a diagnosis themselves experienced discrimination and stigmatised language due to perceived dementia. So one of the key cases that we looked at was the case of Mrs. Hutchinson versus ASDA. So in this case, the employer repeatedly suggested retirement to the employee due to her age and due to her dementia diagnosis, and the tribunal ruled that this constituted age discrimination and harassment, and that the repeated suggestions led to the claimant feeling excluded and emotionally distressed, and the employer failed to recognise that such discussions should be handled with care to avoid reinforcing ageist stereotypes and making the employee feel undervalued in the workplace. And there was also the case of Mrs. Boyle versus Norfolk Limited. So in this case, the claimant didn't have a diagnosis of dementia and wasn't displaying any symptoms. The respondent believed that she had a diagnosis of dementia and dismissed her solely based on this. So as a result, the tribunal ruled that this was unfair dismissal and she completely won her case. So what are the next steps for study? Well, the Australian part of the research is still ongoing. The Canadian judgments directly related to dementia are being qualitatively analysed to determine if they reveal stigma, misconceptions, or problematic attitudes worth noting. And they'll also be analysed to assess if the legislation was applied effectively within the context of the workplace. So looking at things such as reasonable adjustments to see if they were implemented to support continued employment or if there was a failure to implement this. So just to echo what Rachel and Kiera said, thank you for listening. I've also included the website to the network, my email address and my LinkedIn there if you have any further questions. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we go over to questions then, I'd like to thank Laura talking about the Working with Dementia Network Plus and research team. I'd like to thank Rachel for covering improving work experiences, and there's still an awful lot of work to do around that. We also heard from Kiera on the economic impacts of young onset dementia. And it was interesting really that there wasn't any research particularly on individuals and how that can affect their lifespan and the lifespan of their family. And we looked at tribunals, and there were some shocking cases there. So we were looking with Connor how employment law is actually applied in practice, and in particular looking at tribunals. So I'm going over to my team, Catherine and Kate. Have we got any questions that are coming up?
Yes, we do. We do have some questions.
You're cutting out a bit, Catherine. I can't quite hear you. Oops.
Maybe the microphone is better.
Nope, you've gone again.
Hang on a minute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's fine now. Yeah.
Good. Okay, great. I'll get the laptop a bit closer. So yeah, we've had a couple of people in the chat sharing their experiences of working after a diagnosis or supporting their loved ones after a diagnosis and trying to work. And they want to ask what advice you could give them for talking to their employers and how they go about approaching an employer and asking for those adjustments after they've had that diagnosis.
Thank you. Can I go to Rachel and Laura? So Rachel first.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really great question. And just to refer back to the conference again, that was something that was discussed and came out then as well as in the focus groups. And I think it's really a very kind of relationship focused dynamic. And I think it's where the relationship with your line manager and your colleagues is really important to feel like you're safe to be able to discuss diagnosis or caring responsibilities and feel like you can have that support. And obviously that's not the case for everybody. Not everybody feels safe to discuss their health concerns or their caring responsibilities with their employer. So I think it just emphasises the importance of those relationships within the workplace and it just being a very individual conversation. The adjustments that work for one person with a dementia diagnosis are not going to work for another person with a dementia diagnosis. And the same with care responsibilities. That looks very different depending on perhaps the life stage that you're at or the career stage or your other circumstances around that. So yeah, very individual and very relationship centered, but it's really about employers making sure that their employees and their staff feel safe and can have those conversations in a sort of not always a formal way, if that makes sense, because sometimes you just need to chat it through with somebody before you start having boxes on forms and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you. Anything to add, Laura?
Yeah, no, Rachel's explained that really well, and that's definitely echoed at our recent conference where we had the experience of an employer alongside their employee, and they discussed how that situation occurred and how it unfolded and how that was managed. So it was really good to hear that, but definitely the relationship building is really important. We have got some resources on our website, so some advice for employers and employees that have been produced from previous research. So if you've got the opportunity to have a look over our Working with Dementia website, you should be able to find those links to that. But any difficulty at all finding them, just let us know and we can get that information over. And also there have been some very good information produced by the team at Dementia UK on dementia and employment. So I'd also encourage you to have a look over the material that they've produced, because there's some great material and insights there. So yeah, there are some resources to get people thinking and talking about those situations. Thank you very much. We go to the next one.
Yeah, and I think actually a comment in the chat echoes that, is that it's about the educating the employers as well. And we had somebody comment that they ran a dementia-friendly session at a Tesco, and then after that they were much more able to support their employees who were affected by dementia. So I think that's a good point to add there as well. So a question here: can an employer refuse the person being given medical retirement?
Oh, I'm going to go to Connor for that one.
I'm not really sure. Before I answer, I guess to clarify, I've not got a legal background, so I don't want to give any advice that's wrong. But I'm not sure.
Go on, yeah.
I'm not sure if they can refuse retirement if it's due to a medical reason. I think as long as the right processes are followed.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely sure, so I don't want to give advice that's incorrect or.
No, of course. Sorry for putting you on the spot, Laura. Anything that you can pick up on?
I'd agree with Connor. There's probably more context that's needed for that particular question, and I think we might be not wanting to give, as Connor said, legal advice. So yeah, probably more information and some more expertise from the legal perspective, rather than us perhaps commenting on a situation that might not be correct for that particular scenario. So yeah.
Yes. There's an organisation called Pathways Through Dementia, and it might be worthwhile having a look on their website. So Pathways Through Dementia, if you do a normal search, you'll be able to come up with that, and they can actually kind of direct you. If they haven't got the information themselves, they can direct you to the relevant person from a legal aspect. So thank you.
So the next question is where should people go for legal advice around dementia and work? And can people get help with the cost of taking legal action against an employer if they had to?
Gosh, I wouldn't be able to say myself, but Pathways Through Dementia is probably the best place to go to from my experience of when I was working on the helpline. I think if we leave your details, I'm more than happy to go and have a look and try and find out for you. So Catherine, if you can take the details, I will get back to you.
Yeah, we'll see if we can. Okay. Do we have any information on how many people with dementia remain in work after their diagnosis, and for what length of time? Is there any evidence for that?
Oh, I think I'll throw that open to all of you. Have you come across it in your research? I know I personally haven't seen anything about it.
I would really love to know the answer to that question, as I'm sure everyone in this webinar would. I think one of the difficulties is because diagnosis can take so long. Yes. Often people have been at a point where they've left employment by the time that diagnosis comes through. And it's also difficult because employers, for example, don't necessarily keep records of things like a diagnosis and these kind of things. So it's very difficult to actually get that answer and that statistic, because it's just not systematically recorded in a way that would make that easy. I don't know if Connor, looking through the tribunal judgments, if that's been any easier to kind of work out how many people may have taken a claim because of dementia, or if that's also been difficult?
It's been quite difficult because the judgments are only recorded once it reaches a final hearing. We don't know how many were settled outside of court or were settled before it reached the need to go to a tribunal. So I'm not entirely sure of the true scale, which is something we have noted in our findings, is that we're only looking at a very small percentage. We don't know if this is indicative of the population or if it's only the sample they've actually taken it to tribunal. Because another important bit to consider is there's a very, very strict time limit for tribunal judgments. So they've only got 3 months minus 1 day to take something to start the process of taking it to a tribunal. So if someone's going through a diagnosis process, this could take up that time. So by the time they actually start taking it to a tribunal, it could be timed out. So we're not sure how many cases have fallen because of that, or so it's quite difficult to know the true scale of dementia in the workplace.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good area for research. So I'm setting a challenge for you all now.
We have a comment here. They say their husband is 49 with young onset dementia. Accessing financial support has been a nightmare, and they would welcome your views on the challenges with getting PIP, for example.
Ooh, would anyone like to come in on that before I speak?
I'm happy to start. So firstly, I find it beyond frustrating when I hear that people have issues accessing financial support following a diagnosis. I just think it's a real error with the system, and it's really frustrating when I hear that. I know that the forms can be quite lengthy and ask some questions that are not always relative to a dementia diagnosis, for example. And I also know that there are issues in accessing timely financial support, so these assessments can take quite a long time. As far as I'm aware, there are organisations that can help people with PIP forms. So I think the Citizens Advice can help people with those forms, and I'm sure there's more local organisations that can help with these things. But yeah, I just find it really frustrating that this is an issue for people who are already experiencing the diagnosis.
Yeah. And sometimes when people go for an assessment, the assessors are not actually clued into young onset dementia in presentation, so that can be problematic too. I mean, if you've got young onset teams within the area, often they can be able to signpost you to the people that are better to fill in those forms, and if not, actually sit alongside you and do that. Yeah, because there is a special technique to filling in these forms, as I found from practice. Yeah. Any other questions?
One more comment here about having issues regarding staff pensions due to leaving early due to their caring role. They've had to leave their employment earlier than they had planned, and affecting their pension. Any advice on that?
Anyone like to take anything on that?
Sorry. I will say one thing about that is that was something that has come up in this review, is issues accessing pension. So it's definitely a common theme that so many different people are experiencing. But in terms of any practical advice about that, I will hand it over to another member.
It's something that's come up, and we're working on the modern service framework for frailty and dementia as we speak. So we're meeting on a monthly basis up until December. And that's something that the carers organisations and ourselves at Alzheimer's Society, AR UK, are all feeding into. We do need to have some better financial support for families that are living with all types of dementia. And often if you become a carer, it penalises you from your future pensions. So we're trying to do that at the moment with the government. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question here which says it's for you, Connor, but it's another one of the legal ones, so I don't know if you'll be able to answer it. But it says, what is the legal standpoint for somebody with obvious MCI symptoms but no formal diagnosis, and they were dismissed and having to sign an NDA? Any advice on that one? I know it's a tricky one.
I think it maybe depend on the circumstances behind the dismissal. But I know from our research that you don't necessarily need a formal diagnosis for something to be disability discrimination. can be based as long as the employer's got constructive knowledge of symptoms or suspected that they might have a diagnosis, that can sometimes be enough. But I don't know I don't know enough about the specific case to offer advice, especially if there's NDAs involved. But I think sometimes from our research we find that disclosing a diagnosis can sometimes make things a wee bit easier, because it means that you don't have that ambiguity about is there constructive knowledge or is there not, because then you know it's there in black and white that there is knowledge of a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Then that all ties into like a stigma involved, and if there's a lack of trust between the employer and the employee, so it's not always as clear cut as it should be.
I can see Marie has a hand up. If you have a question, Marie, can you type it into the chat? As it's a webinar, we can't see you on camera. So if you have a question, just pop it in the chat for us. I also want to just ask you all about the research you're doing and future plans for that research, and what is your plan for disseminating that research and the follow-up with it? Anyone wants to go first?
Laura?
I will.
Well, yeah, because our three researchers are now kind of drawing their research programs to a conclusion. So we're really looking forward to getting those outputs out. But each of the researchers has got a plan for disseminating all their really good outputs. So keep an eye on our website for the fine detail of all of those. Rachel's is a little bit further ahead because her research started earlier, so you'll be able to see some more of what Rachel's done. But I know that Connor and Kiera have also got plans for those pieces of research, so you will see more coming out soon. I don't know if Kiera and Connor, you wanted to add anything to that.
So just from my side, so there are going to be 5 rapid reviews in the area of employment and dementia. So I'm just in the process of working on those reviews, and then they will be published and shared within the network and the public as well.
Super, thank you.
That's great.
Yeah. And similar, we've got plans for I think 3 papers so far based on different aspects of the research. We're hoping to get them done fairly soon. I think there's one paper that we're closer to starting than the other 2. But yeah, like Rachel and Kiera said, and Laura, everything will be on the website once it's published.
Great. Good. Lovely. All right, I think that's all the questions. Just a reminder that we will share the slides and recording of the webinar with a follow-up email in the next few days. So yeah, thank you very much. Back over to you, Hilda.
Thank you. So thank you very much. Thank you to Laura, to Rachel, to Kiera, to Connor. I really appreciate your input today and sticking to time. That is so easy for a chair to do. So thank you very much indeed. Obviously, people can look on your website. If there's any questions that you're not quite sure of, send them through to Catherine, and then I'll have a look and see what we can actually kind of glean together if we weren't able to answer your questions quite as fully as you would like. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you all of the audience, and obviously log into our next webinar. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.